Sarah Adams, welcome back.
Great to be here.
We have a love-hate relationship. I love seeing you and having you on the show, and then every time you leave, I'm pissed off about everything you're talking about. So we had earlier this week, actually, was this week, you posted something about the Pentagon getting pissed off at you and sending you an email that they don't appreciate you disseminating open source information and that you're not doing it through the proper channels. So we're going to dive into that. That's why, thank you for rushing out here. I wanted to get that immediately, and so we're going to crank this out in like 3 days. But anyways, and then we got a whole slew of other topics to go over. But for those of you that don't know, this is your third appearance on the show. Mm-hmm. We already have a fourth scheduled for later in 2025. But Sarah Adams, co-author of Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, a cold case investigation. Former CIA officer, Libyan crisis before, during, and after the 9/11 attacks, counterterrorism analyst, targeter for the CIA, senior advisor on the Select Committee on Benghazi, NGO official working across multiple conflict zones, including Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Sudan, known to be 10% humanitarian, 90% warlord.
That's me.
But hey, I heard you mention that I just hired this guy, my new head of production. You said he looks like a terrorist. Please don't kill him. I really, really need him here. So if you could just refrain from that, that would be great.
It's dark in here, and he walked in.
Oh boy, you don't have his address yet, do you?
Oh, I could have it by the end of the day if I really wanted it.
Perfect. Well, anyways, so let's just start with the Pentagon stuff. That I read your tweet, and let's start with open source information, just for the audience. Can you describe what open source info is? Open source intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people get confused about this. I've even noticed in our past interviews, right? So like our Benghazi investigation, we've collected this entirely ourselves, right? So we are the ones on the ground getting the information. So it's obviously not classified channels, right? We're not going to foreign militaries. We're not going to the intelligence community and getting this information. So it's publicly available, and we can basically share it with whomever we want because it's completely unclassified. So what we do is when we get threat information, we pass it to where it belongs. Sometimes the threat is against a foreign government, so we'll send it to maybe like the ambassador at the embassy in Washington, D.C. And then sometimes the threat is against us. And so we recently got some threats against U.S. embassies. So we've been reaching out to the embassies to let the ambassador know, and then, of course, to let the RSO know, right? The regional security officer who would be in charge of security at those embassies, to let them know. And so when I reached out to one of them in Africa, I got a nasty gram back from the Pentagon that I didn't go through formal channels to share the information, which is ironic because it's unclassified. But the crazy part is they didn't ask anything about the threat. They didn't say, anything about the sourcing, where we got it from. They didn't show any concern at all for the personnel at the embassy. They just cared that I gave them something.
Well, I don't understand how the Pentagon would not be concerned with the safety of Americans at an American embassy, and the only thing they're concerned about is the information that you're collecting open source.
Exactly. And remember, there's DOD personnel. There's 100% DOD personnel at the embassy I'm talking about. So that's the crazy part, right? Instead of just reaching out to me and saying, hey, this is really interesting information. Can we work together? We'd love to hear what you have. Come sit down with our team. Let's see how we can get ahead of this threat. Like, they got mad that I gave it to the State Department, which is who you would give a threat to the embassy to.
What Can you talk about the actual threat that the Pentagon doesn't seem to think is important?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked previously about Al-Qaeda planning embassy attacks. Obviously, I've talked about they're planning an attack in Bamako in Mali. So this is another location in Africa where they're planning the attack. I don't want to give up everyone I know because, then you get into sourcing. Obviously, everyone I know I will pass to the U.S. government, especially the State Department. So I don't hold on to threat reporting. But it's just Al-Qaeda Qaeda has all these waves of attacks planned, okay? If you've read our October 7th Know Thy Enemy report, you know this all started with the Hamas attacks, right? That was one of al-Qaeda's planned attack, and we can talk more about that one later. So they have kind of like these waves against Israel. And then they have like waves against Europe, waves against us, waves to create the Islamic Caliphate, right? So a lot of the African plotting, for example, is the waves to create the Islamic Caliphate. So the Islamic Caliphate is basically obviously Afghanistan, Syria. That's why they've trained a lot. What's going on right now, Iraq. They're in a dream world. They have India on it. And then it's like all of North Africa. And then in a future phase, it then goes up into Spain, right? Like in the olden days. So it's just all their plots they have in place to put into motion these elements. And so their embassy plots, for example, are they have some in Africa, and then they have some in Europe, and then they have some in the Middle East, all for a different purpose. The Middle East is to push us out for the caliphates. The Africa is to push us out for the caliphates. And then the Europe, right, is just to go after, and then that'll go in with the homeland attack too. But the Europe is just to target the U.S. for its involvement in the Middle East.
Do they have a priority list?
They don't exactly have a priority list. Like, they're all waves and some can be concurrent. What matters is how long it takes to train attackers, right? So the Hamas attacks was like less than 1,500 guys, right? They actually initially planned to train them from August 7th, 2022 to October 7th, 2022. They ended up pushing the attack a year, and so they ended up with more training, which helped the attackers because of Zawahiri's assassination. So then the U.S. homeland, for example, they want to use 1,000 terrorists, right? So that took time to put the 1,000 through the pipeline. Syria, they trained 10,000 terrorists to send to Syria. It takes time to put 10,000 terrorists through the pipeline, right? So it depends on the size and the camp capacity and then the type of training, right? Are you putting them through suicide bomber training? That's its own camps, and that's about 20% of the camps they run. Are you putting them through advanced urban warfare? So it just depends on what camp you're going to. And then even some of the camps are broken down by ethnicity. Like, they might not put Libyans in the same camp as they put Somalians or Syrians. So some camps are broken down if you're Arab or not. So it really is just going to depend on those capacities.
You know, these guys, I think it was you that posted a video of an Al-Qaeda training camp, and it was almost like a display. It looked like a well-done YouTube video of skills. Is that common?
Yeah, but that's a step down. So
that was really good.
That's Taliban. Those are the Taliban camps. So we can't get those kind of videos out of the Al-Qaeda camps, as you can imagine. You can't even bring phones into the Al-Qaeda camps. So Al-Qaeda is even a level above those.
I mean, I'm going to overlay that video for the audience to see just how sharp these guys are getting. I mean, that's really good.
Well,
when I saw that, it scared the shit out of me.
Remember, their life is they train all the time.
Yeah.
So if that's all you're doing all day long, I mean, you're going to get really competent at it. And then they have different emotions behind it too, and, you know, different beliefs and the religion behind it too, which makes you more devout. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then we had a little brief discussion about suicide, the invisible bomb vests downstairs. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's kind of one of those things that keep you up at night, right? You know, when we're talking about the threats to the homeland, you know, if you subscribe to the newsletter, Shawn Ryan's newsletter, go to Vigilance Elite.
So for everybody that doesn't know already, Sarah writes a weekly intelligence report, all things terrorism. It's in the Shawn Ryan Show newsletter. You can go to ShawnRyanShow.com. There's a sign-up link. It'll be in your inbox every Monday.
So we first talked about what they call the invisible bomb in the newsletter, and basically it was highlighted in December, just this last December, and it was Al-Qaeda's in the Arab Peninsula, so their branch in Yemen, right? And they basically were showing off. It's really interesting. The video got taken down right away. And then I think most people in the US didn't even see it. So like TSA completely ignored putting out the actual piece of the video that mattered. And so the big piece of the video was teaching terrorists how to make a bomb that goes through a magnetometer. So, you know, like most airports in the world, you don't have that weird hand scan thing. You just go through a random metal detector. So this bomb basically goes through the metal detector, okay? So they were showing it off then. Well, now Al-Qaeda's advanced and it's in a suicide vest. But the interesting part is it doesn't just go supposedly through the metal detector. They made it with components dogs aren't trained on to sniff. So if you say, okay, well, we'll up our security and put more dogs, Al-Qaeda is saying, well, we've defeated that too. And this is the type of vest they plan to use potentially in their homeland attack that's coming up. So it's very concerning because we aren't prepared for that. I mean, most of the buildings you go into, even if they have some sort of thing, it's already defeats that.
I mean, I don't think we're prepared for anything that's coming.
Right, we're not.
I mean, do we have any preparations at all? I mean, from what I've seen, we have no preparations. We're going to get into more about the funding of Taliban. I mean, we're funding our own demise here. I mean, have you seen any positives? Is anybody doing anything?
No, and actually, Al-Qaeda makes a joke out of the fact that they move the money we give to the Taliban to the camps that train the homeland attackers, right? So it's almost like an insider joke, like, yes, we are forcing America to fund their own attacks. So that is the plan, too, that the money will go back to us and our government. And then that makes Americans also look at our government like it's an inside job. You knew it, right? And so Al-Qaeda is going to play that game, which is really interesting. Al-Qaeda found the Building 7 conspiracy stuff fascinating. And they have actually had discussions about how we could do ruses and bring in the Building 7 people to make them blame their government more. So they're actually even looking at our conspiracies and targeting those people for the homeland attack. So basically, those people almost back Al-Qaeda as revolutionaries and rebels and heroes against our government. Kind of like how the Hamas supporters do it.
All right, so we have a list of stuff to go down here. I think since we're on funding the Taliban, let's start there. But, you know, you broke that news first. You broke $40 million a week was going to the Taliban, funded from State Department to all these different NGOs. Then our mutual friend Legend came on. He broke that it was actually $40 to $87 million a week. Then, you know, we're also, Scott Mann has confirmed it, former Green Beret Lieutenant Colonel, retired. Then me and Scott went to Vienna to interview Masood, who is for everybody that hasn't seen that, that's the leader of the commander of the Afghan resistance. And he confirmed it as well. And so we've actually put a petition out. I just looked at it this morning, as 382,000 signatures. I'm going to link the petition below again to spin that out again. And we sent that to McCall. Nothing. From what I understand, not one thing has been done. Why do you think Congressman McCall hasn't done it? It's because, you know, I see these reports he was drunk at the airport. Maybe he's just too drunk to actually do anything. Or maybe he's too busy. You know, the other story I hear about him all the time is the insider trading shit. Has he done anything? Anything at all?
No, the problem is, it's kind of like they bring these people in front of Congress, they give them 5-minute sound clips, right? They make a little bit of news off it, but there's no then action, or there's no plan to do any accountability. And then they say, yeah, Americans, we did what you wanted. We brought Tyler Andrew Vargas on, right? But what has he done for him since it happened, right? And this is the big problem with Congress. You know, people say, these Congress people aren't doing their jobs, but they keep voting them back in, right? Like, we complain about them, but no one's actually holding their feet to the fire to do their job. I honestly don't think we're going to get anything effective against the Taliban, right? I mean, your congressman, Representative Burchett, he put the money in to stop the bill to stop the money going to the Taliban. It's sitting in the Senate. I don't think anyone's picked it up. Nancy Mace tried to do the bill to actually designate the Taliban a terrorist organization. I heard a number of Republican Congress people reach out to her and gave her a hard time about it. So that's completely dead. We can't even get our Congress people to call them a terrorist group, and they're beheading people.
Why? What's behind that?
My theory is we have some people who haven't thought this through because of the Ukraine war, and they think we can especially use someone like Sirajuddin Haqqani as a counter to Russia. That there's no other explanation for the amount of money we're putting into this, because it's not just up to 87 million a week. That's only the money we fly into Kabul. Right? We send money other ways. One really great example is we fund the Taliban's political office in Qatar. That's not the 87 million. There's at least 10 million that we just pay their operating expenses a month. Completely separate. Yeah, we've been doing that since 2013. So this is not a new thing we've been funding the Taliban, right? We were funding them while they're killing our soldiers.
I just don't. Where's it hung up in the Senate? Have you heard any?
Well, I think
who's holding it up?
Well, I don't know if someone's holding it up. Basically, a senator, or hopefully a grouping of them, are supposed to pick it up, and then they shepherd it through the process, like they sponsor it. I don't think we've seen anyone pick it up to sponsor it.
When I started podcasting, I had no idea how to run an online business or where to get started. I tried several different companies to get my web store up and running, and they were all confusing. Then I found Shopify. Now my online store runs smoother than ever. I love how easy Shopify is to set up. It's flexible, powerful, and helps me grow my business. Shopify is the perfect platform to start small and scale up. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/SRS. That's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/SRS to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/SRS. I know everybody out there has to be just as frustrated as I am when it comes to the BS and the rhetoric that the mainstream media continuously tries to force feed us. And I also know how frustrating it can be to try to find some type of a reliable news source. It's getting really hard to find the truth and what's going on in the country and in the world. And so one thing we've done here at Shawn Ryan Show is we are developing our newsletter. And the first contributor to the newsletter that we have is a woman, former CIA targeter. Some of you may know her as Sarah Adams, call sign Superbad. She's made 2 different appearances here on the Shawn Ryan Show. And some of the stuff that she has uncovered and broke on this show is just absolutely mind-blowing. And so I've asked her if she would contribute to the newsletter and give us a weekly intelligence brief. This is going to be all things terrorists, how terrorists are coming up through the southern border, how they're entering the country, how they're traveling, what these different terrorist organizations throughout the world are up to. And here's the best part, the newsletter is actually free. We're not going to spam you. It's about 1 newsletter a week, maybe 2 if we release 2 shows. The only other thing that's going to be in there besides the intel brief is if we have a new product or something like that. But like I said, it's a free CIA intelligence brief. Sign up. Links in the description or in the comments. We'll see you in the newsletter. Donald Trump is officially the next president of the United States of America. While millions of Americans are celebrating the victory, thousands of others are still concerned about their savings. The unfortunate truth is we still have a $35 trillion debt. The interest on that debt could now be larger than our entire defense budget for the first time in history. Plus, the wars that started during the Biden administration are still raging across the globe. So what can you do to help protect your savings? Many Americans are already taking action by reaching out to a top-rated precious metals company, that's Goldco. Right now, Goldco is offering a free gold and silver kit to show you how precious metals like gold and silver could help you diversify your savings before it's too late. Visit ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD to get your copy free of charge. Plus, you could receive up to a 10% instant match on bonus silver for qualified accounts. Visit ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD. That's ShawnLikesGold.com. Performance may vary. Consult with your tax attorney or financial professional before making an investment decision. What else should I be asking you about funding the Taliban?
Well, another thing is, just a couple updates from last time. Obviously the money hasn't stopped. But, we found out, so the Taliban has a supreme leader, right? Hibatullah Akhundzada. And we found out his budget just for his office is $48 million a year. Think about that. It's a Taliban commander. That's just the budget for his office, like to run, how much is this? How much do you pay to run this a year? So we actually basically counted kind of the bags of money that go to him, from these weekly deliveries. And he gets a small cut compared to like Sirajuddin Haqqani, who probably gets 5-6 times what he gets. But we're giving him about $3 million a month. So we're almost funding his entire office. The US government is with counterterrorism dollars, right?
Holy shit.
The problem with this is we're basically playing both sides of the Taliban, and they're playing a ruse on us. So Hibatullah is what you call the Kandahari Taliban. That's just that original Taliban that Mullah Omar was in, that founded the Taliban in like the mid-90s, okay? Then you have the Haqqani network, right? Sirajuddin Haqqani, his father was Jalaluddin Haqqani. We famously backed him during the Mujahideen era. So these are kind of two of the senior leaders besides Mullah Omar's son, okay? And the U.S. plays them off of each other, but they don't. We think we're effectively playing them off of each other, but they communicate almost every day through Telegram. They do all their approvals together. They share information, but they use this fake kind of battle between them. So when they sit down with the Americans, they can say, oh yeah, here's the political crisis going on between the Kandahari Taliban and the Haqqani Taliban. And then America wastes a ton of time on that. And then they ignore the terrorism. They ignore, all the murders going on, the apartheid against the women, right? So they're basically making us focus on an issue that doesn't even exist.
Wow.
Oh, and then one other thing, too, that's really interesting. So, how we have old man Jalaluddin Haqqani, right? He's one of the most famous people at the time, He has a brother. His name is Khalil, okay? So this is Sirajuddin's uncle. So his job in the Taliban is he's the head of refugees. So he has this really interesting scheme. We've put a lot of work into it since last time I was here. And what he does is he goes to basically the pot of money that we give for humanitarian. So this isn't the counterterrorism dollars, because the money that $3 million Hibatullah gets is our counterterrorism dollars. Well, Khalil goes right after the humanitarian dollars. And what he does is say, he collects $5 million a month in this one that we ran down. So he goes and says, I need $5 million a month. This money goes to Afghans returning from Pakistan to be resettled in Nangarhar. What he really does with the $5 million is he gives it to basically another one of his family members, Abdulaziz Haqqani, and he brings it and drops it off at Al-Qaeda training camps. And that's our humanitarian dollars. And so they're basically lying and saying it's going to refugees. And I guess it is. It's going to foreign fighters from foreign countries. There's Libyans in these camps. But it just goes and gets delivered directly to terrorist camps.
How do we've abandoned the Afghan people. We're funding our own demise. Mm-hmm. What would you like to see? I mean, do you think we should be... I feel really bad for our allies over there, that we trained alongside with, we fought with, for 20 plus years. And we just left them out to dry, left all of the intelligence there, left the biometrics, left their addresses, left their fingerprints, left their names, and they're just getting assassinated in record numbers. And, how do you think we should be funding the NRF?
So I think we should fund a coalition of the resistance. Mm-hmm. So if you just do the NRF, in my opinion, and I hope I don't upset people, you can't win, right? The NRF is mostly the Tajiks. You also have to bring in the Pashtun resistance and then, the Hazaras. Like, you need a resistance of the different ethnicities and groups. That's how the Libyans actually did it and were successful, right? So you have to have a coalition or like a external government formed. And I think that's what we fund. And then we're funding multiple pieces of the resistance because each of them have different access in different areas, right? Each of them will be successful in different ways. Even the women's movement alone, right, has its own insider things you can take advantage of, right? So I do think we shouldn't pick just one resistance group. We should tell them, come together and, and we're here to back you.
That's after my interview with Masood, I dug in a little bit more, and I didn't, Scott did, and you did, and you guys are the ones that feed me all that information, but it sounds like that, are they working together at all yet? Because it seems very compartmentalized, and it is, they need to get their shit together. It's getting a little frustrating.
Yes, they need to get their shit together, but I do think privately they do work a little closer. They have a public thing they do once a year. It's a Vienna meeting. It's not enough. I do see a little more collaboration between groups than people see, but I do see a lot of them undercutting each other. They do a lot of gossip, right? Like this person works with the Iranians, this person works with the Russians, right? And they're not thinking, hey, we're a united front against the Taliban, like our near-term goal is to defeat the Taliban, because even some of them are focused on their regions, and they might not even want to be Afghanistan if the Taliban falls. They might want their own region, right? So we don't have a catalyst yet to even pull all of them together, unfortunately. At least in the Libyan revolution, every single person wanted Gaddafi dead, and every single person, even the terrorists, right, were like, our immediate goal is to take him out, right? And they all came together with that immediate goal, but we don't actually have something like that in Afghanistan. And I think that's one of the complaints that has always occurred over the years. There are even pieces within, the Afghan community that have always downplayed the Taliban. So when I caught the number 2 of the Taliban, Mullah Baradar, right? So we caught him in Pakistan. He was in Pakistani custody. Well, when the Afghan government reached out to us, they didn't reach out to render him and put him in Bagram. They reached out and said, you need to release him. Why did you detain him? So think of how that makes the government look at Afghans. It's like, well, you don't really think that the Taliban's that much of a threat. You're asking them to release the operational leader, the number 2 of the Taliban, right? So we still have this problem where a lot of people still sit at the table with the Taliban, right? Khalilzad's really great example. So we also need to do something with these Taliban sympathizers because they're going to keep undercutting any kind of resistance. And I do think they're a part of keeping people split too. So yeah, they all have to come together. And, I've honestly said this frankly to people. So, Al-Qaeda's planning a homeland attack. And I've actually said to people in the resistance, if that attack happens and you guys haven't come together and you can't show us you're a capable force, we're going to Pakistan, right? I'm going to call up the Pakistanis and say, I'm going to give you a lot of money to take out Hamza bin Laden. I'm not going to call the resistance because you guys are infighting and you didn't come together. So I do think they need to come up with a plan. Even in Haiti, after those gangs took over, right away, they're like, oh, we made this interim council, right? That matters to the West. It might not matter to the people fighting and doing attacks every day against Taliban, but you need some sort of united front to get recognition.
Who do you envision would take control of that? Would it be Masood? I
would like a power sharing agreement. Obviously, I like NRF. I really like General Zia. So I would probably lean a little more towards him. Like I said, I don't really like to pick sides, though. I think you can have leaders across this doing multiple things. Even if you think about the Libyan revolution, you can't name a guy. You can name the guy who set up the council, Usama al-Jalali, but you can't name the commanders. There was no head commander, right? They all ran certain pieces of it, and I think that's what it needs to be.
Well, they're going to be watching this. They're watching this show they're on it.
But, the terrorists watch it more. So.
Yeah, well, I found that out. They started tweeting about it, but on X, which, is kind of, unsettling. But, there's another thing that you kind of brought up. Why did the UN invite the Taliban to talk about climate change? What is that?
So the UN essentially wants to recognize the Taliban, right? But every time they try, women show up in protests, and And so they're now trying, like, it seems odd ways to do it. And they're like, let's bring them to the table on the climate, right? Because people agree on that. So it's just the UN's way to keep kind of opening the doors more and more to the Taliban, because the intent is to recognize that government. Like, the UN is not planning anything that I've seen to basically go after the Taliban. Remember, we talked about this previously, they gave up the restrictions on some of the Taliban senior leaders' travels. That's how Sirajuddin Haqqani got to go to the Hajj, right? The UN Security Council allowed that. So yeah, this is just another step in their process to recognize the Taliban.
So they don't. So this has nothing to do with climate change.
No, it
this
doesn't.
has everything to do with just.
Come on, you lived over there. They burn shit every day.
They burn tires to keep warm. I remember spitting in the sink in winter, and my spit was gray. That's how bad it was. So
just not at the edge of the climate change problem.
Yeah, I mean it's ridiculous, but the audience doesn't know that, and so that's why I want to bring that up. You know, it has nothing to do with climate change. It's only
politics.
Yep. So let's move into Hamza bin Laden. Mm-hmm. Let's move into that.
Yeah, I mean, since I was on the last time, the Western press finally broke he's alive. The interesting part is the U.S. still won't print it. The U.S. press won't. But what happened is, interestingly, British intel leaked it to their press.
Really?
Yeah. And from what I'm hearing, they did it because they were upset so apparently the CIA has been trying to curb the U.S. intelligence community and even trying to curb the Brits, saying Hamza's not alive, don't talk about Hamza. And basically the Brits are like, screw you. And they put it out in the press. The funny part is the U.S. press still didn't pick it up. So the U.S. press still went to the CIA, and CIA is like, don't print it. So it went, all over the world. It was all over in India, all over in Africa, and it didn't print here.
Hold on. Why does the CIA not want that out?
Because they don't believe Hamza bin Laden's alive.
Excuse me?
I know.
How so?
He's like running Al-Qaeda. He's hosting meetings like every week.
Do they really not believe that? Or
I think
is this just to cover their tracks?
I think they really don't believe it, but then they've put no effort in the last couple of years to be like, well, we should run it down and maybe reverse our assessment. And remember, the same thing happened after Benghazi, right? We knew Al-Qaeda was there in real time. And then they all went down some weird fake protest thing. But then CIA never changed their assessments when they knew Al-Qaeda was on the compound, right? So sometimes it's almost impossible to get the CIA to reverse an assessment.
So for those that don't know, Hamza bin Laden he's basically the catalyst here. He is marrying into all these terrorist networks. We discussed this on your previous interview, but just to summarize it, he is kind of uniting them. The common goal is to come to the West, terrorize the West. How is this guy different than his father, Osama?
Yeah, Hamza's a problem. So it's really interesting. So Osama bin Laden, first off, Hamza really believes in being kind of undercover and covert. Like, he doesn't want to really go out there and be on TV or even do like the audio recordings. Like, he wants to stay under the radar, hidden. He wants you to not even like know he's running things. So he wants a hidden hand in everything. So I told you, they're involved in October 7th. Al-Qaeda is never going to claim responsibility for it. Al-Qaeda is not going to claim responsibility for these embassy attacks. And they have a plan for that, I'll tell you. They're not going to claim responsibility for the Europe attacks. And they're definitely not going to claim responsibility for the U.S. homeland attack. Very different, right, than his father. The other thing is his father...
Hold on. Why are they not claiming responsibility?
Because they want to keep their safe havens intact, and they don't actually care if you know it was Al-Qaeda. They just want to take it to us, right?
Oh, shit.
It does not matter if it's ISIS, if it's HTS, if it's Hamas. They're all one, right? They're all an Islamic army. And nobody's taking this Islamic army concept seriously, but Hamza views all the terrorist groups in the world now under his Islamic army, and that's the way he views them. And he's almost like Iranian Quds Force, where he's like, okay, this is my proxy here, this is my proxy here, this is my proxy here. Like, he's planning an attack in Lebanon against some sort of U.S. interests, right? It's an Al-Qaeda Hezbollah plot. But when it occurs, only Hezbollah is going to take responsibility. You won't even know Al-Qaeda is involved in it. Just like Giuliani's blitzkrieg. Al-Qaeda has supported that, right? They gave him 10,000 fighters, right? Taliban gave him camps in Afghanistan. Are you hearing anything about the Taliban and Al-Qaeda right now when they're talking about Syria?
No.
Zero. Did you hear their names come up at all for October 7th?
No.
Yeah. Hamza's killing it. So Hamza now wants to do completely covert action and let everything fall under this Islamic army. And the really interesting thing is his father was incredibly patient, right? Remember, everybody knows it took him 5 years to prove 9/11. And Osama bin Laden was like, hey, we can create the Caliphate. I'm okay if it takes 1,000 years. Hamza wants to do everything in his lifetime. He wants the Islamic Caliphate to be created in his lifetime. He wants to bring all of his father's goals, to fruition, and one of them was take it to America, right, on U.S. soil, make them feel the war zones at home. And Hamza takes that very serious, and that's why he has gone full force on this plot. The interesting part is Hamza will approve a plot in one meeting, right? Bring it in, brief this plan you have for the embassy. Yep, I'm good. So he moves a lot faster. And actually, of all things, the IRGC and Iran have complained. And they're even, when they work with Al-Qaeda, they're like, we want Saif al-Adil. He's more calm, cool, collected. Like, we trust him more. We don't think he's going to cause a big ruckus. But they're like, Hamza's a loose cannon. He's running at full speed. We don't know how to control him. So it's almost an interesting thing. So it's funny, right? Other governments are seeing this, and our government won't even talk about him being alive, and he's running fast against us.
Can you go what are his goals? So hold on, I got a lot of questions. So if we have all these networks, we have all these terrorism networks. Is Hamza literally the number one guy? So
Hamza is the number one guy of what is now called the Islamic Army, okay? So the Islamic Army is Sunni Shia. It is his father's vision. Hamza's now put it to reality in the last 2 years, and it basically pulls in every group. It's Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, whoever will agree to it. Obviously, there's a lot of negotiations going on to get people into this. This isn't easy, right? Like, they're constantly giving up things to get people to join in. So he's been very successful. They've now trained about 120,000 people under this Islamic Army umbrella. So these new recruits are coming in. They're not basically training in an ISIS camp or an Al-Qaeda camp. They are, but they're coming out of it as Islamic Army. So when they're doing deployments to Syria, to Somalia, to Mali, these fighters are viewing themselves as Islamic Army. And the point of that is, if they get detained, they're not going to say Al-Qaeda, right? So Hamza set this up. And then he took one of his father's old bodyguards, Hamza al-Ghamdi, his name is, and put him in charge. So Hamza al-Ghamdi is actually basically the commander of the Islamic Army. Maybe like a month ago, FBI upped his reward. So this is funny. So Hamza al-Ghamdi is worth $5 million. Hamza bin Laden, who's in charge of Hamza al-Ghamdi and appointed him, he's on the wanted list for $1 million. So we don't even have our priorities right of who's in charge, who the enemy is, what they're involved in. So there's the whole Islamic Army piece, okay? Now, under the Islamic Army falls the original goals of Osama bin Laden, right? One is to push the U.S. out of the Middle East. That's the wave of attacks that had the Israel attack, right? It's going to be the wave of attacks or the embassy attacks, right? Because it's to push us out of embassies in the Middle East, like they're targeting U.S. Embassy Baghdad, for example, right? Makes perfect sense. And then there is the restoration of the Caliphate. So the Syria push is a restoration of the Caliphate. The Mali push is the restoration of the Caliphate. So he's just doing his father's old goals, but faster, and he's using all the other terrorist groups to make it happen. It's not going to be Al-Qaeda breaching these goals. It's going to be Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whomever. And the way that they're dealing with it is when they're sitting down making these agreements. So when they sat down and talked about Syria and Iraq, okay? Al-Qaeda now has given up the thought of, I want to own territory. Al-Qaeda's thought, I want to be the governments, right? Or I want my allies to be the government. So they more want a political power. So they sat down with ISIS and says, ISIS, if you want to run certain parts of Syria, you want to run certain parts of Iraq, and they've had the same discussion with IRGC, like, we're fine with that. Like, let's come to agreement on what that looks like. So, so there's some really interesting partnerships going on when you'd say, oh, no, they're against each other. It's like, no, they're finding ways to compromise because they all want the same things in a different way.
You had mentioned they have a couple of different goals. Well, a handful of goals. You mentioned Europe. You mentioned Israel, I believe. You mentioned the U.S. Where are all the targets?
Sure.
And what are the goals?
So,
let's leave the U.S. for last.
Sure. So if you talk about Israel, obviously there was the big Hamas attack, and then they actually have a couple other waves of attacks. I know one of them, and I shared it. I'll probably get yelled at for sharing that one too. And then they want to do against Israel what they do with us, like attack the embassies. Okay, so that's the Israel piece. And then they want to do attacks on Europe. But the interesting part is, even their Europe attacks, they're still leaning towards, hey, when we go attack Norway or whomever, we want to attack the U.S. embassy there. So we're still almost the target, even though they want to do the attack in that country. And then the last piece is they want this October 7th style attack in multiple places in Europe and then in the U.S. And that's the one that Scott talked to you about, that we had, in the AQ 2.0 book. But I realized he didn't give it to you when he was here. So I'm giving you the AQ 2.0 book. But that's really interesting. So we gave a little bit. You worked on this. I gave a little bit of our investigation to it. So this was put together by a European retired intelligence officer. And what he did is he reached out to his huge community from working his entire career and said, what do you have on this? What do you have on this? What do you have on this? And he compiled a bunch of people's investigations into this attack. So this is the best thing you can get open source.
Al-Qaeda 2.0, the upcoming attack on the United States and Europe unveiled.
So Boone and I focus on the U.S. homeland piece of this attack, but people who contributed to the book focus on the Europe piece, right? Because they're European.
Interesting. Could you get me connected?
Yeah, I'll put you in touch.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, since we're giving gifts, I was going to wait till later, but I got you a gift too, Sarah.
Oh,
you heard about the unplugged phone?
Yeah, I use the app, so I'm kind of excited I can upgrade to the phone.
There you go. So, yeah, developed by Eric Prince and his team, one of the dev guys on there.
Good. I'm going to text Eric Prince first from it, because that would be fun. He'll be like, what crap is she asking me for now?
But
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. For those listening, that's a great way to kind of keep your data safe from big tech.
Perfect.
And like Facebook, Google.
Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account right now. I'm fine. They took it down.
But yeah, so where has Hamza bin Laden been all these years?
So we basically found out where he was in 2022, and that's when he was in Kandahar, right? We learned that prior to that, he was in Waziristan, Pakistan, but really the chunk of the time he was in Iran. The thing is, when Qasem Soleimani was killed in early 2020, he was like, I'm not sure Iran can keep me safe if they couldn't keep Soleimani safe. And so he left Iran at that time and went to Pakistan. And so then he stayed in Pakistan until Kabul fell. And then he went into Afghanistan.
In that report that you had mentioned that the British intelligence leaked to the press, where is that? Can we find that and overlay it right now?
Well, yeah, it then was turned into an article. So it just says he's now the head of Al-Qaeda. He's planning operations against the West, these large-scale attacks. So yeah, I think it first was in like the Mirror or the Sun, but then a ton of news articles picked up the same thing.
So it's out there.
Yeah, it's out there.
All over UK media.
Yeah, if you just put Hamza bin Laden live, it'll come up.
What about his brother, Abdullah? Why is that? What is his role? Yeah,
so the interesting part is Abdullah was the one originally in all the meetings, right? And so Abdullah's the one everybody hears about. They're like, yeah, bin Laden has an alive son, Abdullah, and then they discount Hamza because Hamza's very covert, under the radar. Abdullah is interesting because a lot of people don't understand this. So, before the fall of Kabul, when there was the fighting with the Afghan National Army, it was Abdullah bin Laden and a terrorist named Abu Ikhlas al-Masri who were running the fronts of that war. So Al-Qaeda was running the war against our allies when Afghanistan fell. That wasn't a Taliban-led war. That was an Al-Qaeda-led war. And so Abdullah's become an amazing strategist. And a lot of people think he's kind of just this businessman or CEO type. And so now he's pretty much running the operations of Al-Qaeda, and he runs all the terrorist camps. So he is basically the terrorist who trained the homeland attackers. And that's why he really matters. And he knows all the homeland attackers.
Wow. I find it really interesting that they don't even care about the credit anymore because if I remember correctly, when I was working over there, that's all they wanted to do was easiest and biggest target of opportunity so that it hits the press, they can take credit for it, and everybody's scared shitless of them. Now they don't even care about that.
Yeah, they just want to hurt us, right? And the interesting part is, we've spent a lot of time trying to find all the training camps for the homeland attacks, right? And we've really come up with 3 we're confident, right? They've taken advanced urban warfare that we've talked about, suicide bombing training, and then cover and covert training, right? Al-Qaeda is teaching them, don't even say you've been to Afghanistan, if you're Kuwaiti or Saudi, never mention the word Al-Qaeda, right? When they go through these camps together, they're all given fake names. So if we're in camp together, I don't know your name as Shah Ryan, I know you as Joe Bob, right? So the really interesting thing is that matters to them. They don't want the track record.
They're using pseudonyms even within
in
now.
Camps, yep, amongst each other. They don't even trust each other to give the true name.
Holy shit. So they've really fucking stepped it up.
Yeah. And then there's a whole nother piece that it's so hard to get people to comprehend that this now is going to sound like a conspiracy theory, okay? Now, Al-Qaeda, and it's been Hamza bin Laden. Hamza bin Laden went to Sanaullah Ghaffari, who's the head of ISIS Khorasan province, and said, hey, we don't want to just claim our attacks in the US and Europe on ISKP. We need ISKP bodies, right? We need terrorists at that attack. So when they're dead and you ID them back, you say, yes, they're ISIS Khorasan province. So Hamza bin Laden and Sanaullah Ghaffari made a deal, and there would be ISIS fighters in Al-Qaeda's homeland attack. It's really interesting. And then ISIS will claim responsibility for the attack. And they went so far as Taliban has been feeding bits and info to the U.S. government. So after the attack, the U.S. government will go back into its intelligence databases for the last couple years and be like, yeah, we had a little piece on this attacker, he's ISIS. We've had a little piece on that attacker, he's ISIS. We've had a piece on that attacker, it's ISIS. It's an ISIS attack. So U.S. intel is going to back it because they've been feeding the information in. That's how well they've planned this.
Holy shit. All right. Sarah, you're just, my mind's going to explode. I'm going to take a quick break here. We'll come back and get into the rest of this. We all know a good night's sleep is essential to our overall health and wellness. I mean, if you're exhausted from lack of sleep, you're not good for anybody. You can't concentrate, you don't have the energy you need to get through the day. That's where Helix Sleep comes in. Helix is the award-winning mattress brand, and it is recommended by many for improving sleep. Better sleep means an overall better quality of life. I've had my Helix for years now. It's been a game changer for me. I have less pain, I feel more rested, and I have more energy throughout the day thanks to my Helix mattress. Helix really has been amazing for me. Helix has every kind of firmness or height mattress for every kind of sleeping comfort. And right now, get 20% off plus 2 free pillows for all our mattress orders when you order at helixsleep.com/SRS. That's helixsleep.com/SRS for 20% off and 2 free pillows for all mattress orders. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance that you can get done right here, right now. You can be covered from your couch in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. Just go to meetfabric.com/Shawn. That's meetfabric.com/Shawn. Like me, many of you have kids, and protecting my family with life insurance is at the top of my priority list. Fabric provides me with the peace of mind knowing I am helping to keep my family protected. You can have that same peace of mind with Fabric. Go to meetfabric.com/Shawn and you can learn all about Fabric's free online wills, access to college savings funds, and more tools to sync up your family's finances. Have confidence knowing that Fabric has 1,800 plus reviews and an excellent rating on Trustpilot. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that will fit your family and budget, like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day, and your coverage could be offered instantly. It's all online, so apply when it's convenient. There's absolutely no risk. They have a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can cancel at any time. Go to meetfabric.com/Shawn now. That's meetfabric.com/Shawn. Join me and the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Shawn. That's meetfabric.com/Shawn. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, sir, we're back from the break. I forgot to bring up Al Qaeda in Iran, who I thought were enemies, but sounds like, according to you.
Well, Hamza lived there safely, right? So it says something.
What's going on there?
Well, the interesting thing is, when we went into Afghanistan, we weren't really fighting the senior leaders of Al Qaeda, right? They all fled within those first few months, right? Bin Laden went across Tora Bora, etc. So the Al Qaeda terrorists went to two countries. They went to Pakistan and they went to Iran. Well, in Pakistan, the Pakistani government teamed up with us and they got paid lots of money, and they started capturing terrorists, right? Like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, for example. So the terrorists then are like, well, we're probably going to be safer in Iran, but now if you're in Iran, your wives are there, your children are there, you're going to make a very close relationship with the government, as you can imagine. And so Al-Qaeda made a close relationship with Qasem Soleimani, who's now deceased, but he headed the Iranian Quds Force. And Qasem Soleimani basically asked one of his really good friends, another member of the military, Mohammed Kazemi, his name was, and he said, hey, your job is to keep Hamza bin Laden safe, Saif al-Adil safe, and he actually was also protecting one of our Benghazi plotters. That's why we know this so well. So it was his job to keep them safe. So when Qasmani died, this individual moved up. He's not the head of the Quds Force. He's the head of the IRGC's intelligence organization. So basically, the people that the man who harbored Al-Qaeda is one of the most senior intelligence officials in all of Iran. So that's the relationship. And he comes all the time to Afghanistan. He plotted the Hamas attacks with Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and obviously Hamas, and then internal units within Iran to include Khomeini. Like Khomeini was involved in the Hamas attack planning, and even Hibatullah Akhundzada, who we talked about, the head of the Taliban, he issued the fatwa for the attack. And then it was an IRGC general that did the go for the attack, right? Like that's how intermingled all these people have become. And we still have analysts that say, oh, Iran doesn't get along with Al-Qaeda, or Iran's attacking Al-Qaeda. It's like, what are you talking about? They harbored them almost the entire war we had.
So these guys are super in cahoots.
Yeah, they're very, very close relations.
Are they sharing intelligence?
100%. To where the Taliban and Al-Qaeda gave the Iranian government an intelligence base. It's basically in an Al-Qaeda camp in Kandahar.
Are you?
Yep.
So they're commingled now?
Yeah. And remember, this isn't just Iran. So North Koreans come to Kandahar, the Russians come to Kandahar, the Chinese come to Kandahar, and they don't just meet with the Taliban, they meet with each other.
Well, wait a minute. How can the Russians be involved? Because there was that big mall attack from ISIS, which if all these networks are connected.
Right. The thing is, just like us, Russia had to go to the Taliban to collect on ISIS and to go against ISIS, just like we do. So There's two branches of ISIS. Nobody actually really understands this. ISIS Khorasan province, okay? There's the one we all know that's run by Sanaullah Ghaffari, and he did the Abbey Gate attacks with the Haqqani network, okay? There's a whole nother branch that's based in northern Afghanistan, is run by an individual named Gulmurad Khalimov. He is basically one of the main enemies in the world of Russia. He used to run the Tajikistan Special Forces. He defected to ISIS. He became ISIS's Minister of War. Then he got detained. His death got faked. He somehow got released after the fall of Kabul. And he runs this unit now in northern Afghanistan. And the interesting part is, so the one that's run by Sanaullah Ghaffari, okay, that one basically emanated out of a lot of Pakistanis, a lot of guys from Iraqi agency and the Fatah, some Punjabis, etc. It was always run by a Pakistani until the last leader got captured, Amjad Faruqi, and then Sanaullah took over. So Sanaullah is the first Afghan to run it. But when Sanaullah took over, he'd been a member of the Haqqani network since 2012, and he was the head of the Haqqani network in Kabul, okay? So this branch now is controlled by Sirajuddin Haqqani, right? And they're the ones that jointly did Abbey Gate. The other branch with Khalimov, Sirajuddin Haqqani is giving him refuge in northern Afghanistan. So Sirajuddin Haqqani is funding and supporting the second branch. So the crazy part is the Haqqani branch essentially runs the two arms. Now, it's the northern arm that's getting a lot of those Central Asian terrorists. So even though Sanaullah did the Moscow attacks, the threat from Russia comes from Khalimov. And the Taliban are hiding the Khalimov angle completely from Russia, making them focus on the other one.
Wow.
It's a whole ruse.
Wow. Man, these guys have really stepped it up. Let's move into some of your investigations. I saw you completed 2 more Know Thy Enemy investigations. Let's dive into those.
Yep. So we completed basically October 7th, Know Thy Enemy, right? That's our most recent one. And that was the one that went into the Hamas attacks. And then before that, we completed basically our own Abbey Gate investigation. We weren't going to do either of these. And then in April, CENTCOM put out their investigation to Abbey Gate. So what was that, 3.5 years of doing an investigation? And there is a line in their report. Our investigation identified the suicide bomber as, and it said, Abdul Rahman al-Lagori. That's a kunya or an alias. And I was like, they've investigated this for 3.5 years and they don't know his true name. And that's when so I realized I wanted to do this in April, and I got his true name by the time I released in August, and they couldn't get his true name, a full government body. They had 12 investigators on this panel in 3.5 years. That's how little they investigated Abbey Gate. They also, of course, as you know, covered up the Haqqani network was involved in it.
So is this all just a show, their investigations?
Yes. Remember, I worked in Congress.
What do they actually do?
All the government investigations are checking a box. We did something. But if you actually know how to investigate and you look into it, you can find all these holes, right? They did not do their job properly. So we found out his name, and his name is Abdul Rauf Sangari. So they couldn't even find the true name of a man who blew up 13 of our service members. That's how little they cared. And that's what I find offensive.
What else do we need to know?
For the Abbey Gate investigation, it's really interesting. So our government did 2 things that are very dishonest to the public. One is they made us think this was a lone wolf ISIS bomber, right? It wasn't. This was a planned attack with the senior leadership of ISIS Khorasan province and the senior leadership of the Haqqanis. In our report, we talked through basically 12 terrorists involved. 7 of them are Haqqanis. 5 of them are ISIS, right? And this is how quickly they can plan an attack, okay? The terrorist, we found out the exact date he got released from Bagram. He gets released, so we call the NEO. We say, hey, we're going to do a NEO August 13th, okay? The U.S. government says, we're going to finally do a NEO. They waited that long. 2 days later, August 15th, the suicide bomber, even though they don't know his real name, gets released from Bagram, okay? 3 days later, he's in Kandahar sitting in the operational meeting to plan this attack. Then, the 21st of August, the Haqqanis choose 3 senior commanders who are going to man the gates and let the bomber through the gates, okay? 2 days later, they basically shift a bunch of security from North Gate to Abbey Gate because they want more bodies at Abbey Gate when they blow it up. And then 2 days later after that, U.S. puts out the threat, there's a suicide bomber threat, and then the next day they blow it. That's how quickly they basically find out we're doing a NEO on the 13th. The bomber gets out on the 15th, and they have him at the table on the 18th planning this. They killed over 170 Afghans and 13 of our service members.
Holy.
And the U.S. government made you believe this was a lone wolf.
Did they do that on purpose? Or was it out
I'm
of
sorry.
incompetence?
If
I'm just curious,
can go find out where the planning meeting took place. I know who moved the suicide bomber. I know who moved Sanaullah Ghaffari to Kabul. I know who the 3 men were at the gates. And I know the terrorist, his name is Hafiz Haqqani, who told the bomber, okay, you're in a good spot now, blow. I know all that on my own, collecting on my own. How can the U.S. government not collect that? And if they aren't collecting it, we got a lot more to worry about.
I hope some of these new administration picks get in contact with you. I really do, because you are super sharp. What's the involvement? What is the connection between the October 7th Hamas attacks and Afghanistan? Yeah,
so the interesting part is, right, so this was the other investigation we weren't going to do, okay? So we put out Abbey Gate because CENTCOM, I thought, did something very embarrassing. And then what we knew the plotting had happened in Afghanistan. But we thought, okay, Israel is just going to keep calling it the Hamas attacks until they wipe out Hamas, right? That makes sense. You can't fight 3 or 4 different fronts, right, or different terrorist groups at the same time. Well, we're getting closer to coming up on the year mark of it, and Israel still wasn't telling anyone, obviously they knew IRGC was involved because they took out a bunch of them, but they weren't telling anybody about Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and they weren't striking Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but we knew Israel is in a series of attacks, right? And those series of attacks include the U.S. homeland. So we're like, if we don't put out the truth that Al-Qaeda did October 7th, then how do we expect the law enforcement and first responders in the U.S. to be prepared if no one told them October 7th was the same people who are going to attack in the U.S., right? Because if you can look at those tactics, prepare, do different training, it puts you in a more resilient position if an attack happens in your community. So that was the catalyst that made us put out October 7th. So basically what happened is this was a joint kind of Al-Qaeda, IRGC thing, and I said this is a whole bigger thing, and they did all this over Telegram for the most part. So they had an original planning meeting in Kandahar again, and then they had kind of like their second meeting up in Kabul, and then most of the rest of the plotting occurred via Telegram. And then, which is crazy, right? You'd think our governments could collect that in advance. We learned a lot of things during this process. First off, in the first plotting meeting, it was Saif al-Adil. He runs the military commission of the Taliban. He's the one that chose the date. Do you know what's significant about October 7th?
No.
So he first chose October 7th, 2022. I told you it got pushed a year because of Zawahiri, which is also its own point, right? We struck an Al-Qaeda member, and it forced them to push the attack another year. What if we kept striking them in Afghanistan during that time, right? It could have pushed the attacks longer, and this is why I say we need to strike the command and control of the homeland attack, right? But anyway, set aside, October 7th was the day George Bush announced Operation Enduring Freedom, and we basically started carpet bombing Kandahar.
No shit.
So nobody understands the October 7th attacks actually have a connection to Afghanistan to begin with, and the date was chosen to do with Afghanistan. So everybody who's like, why do we care about Israel? Why is that our problem? It's like, that's just the first in a series. It's coming for us. That's like the test run.
Did you put that together?
Yes. Well, my team, my Know Thy Enemy investigation team.
How has nobody else put that together?
Well, I don't think we're the only ones. So we received kind of a pat on the back from a foreign government that reached out to someone that knows me, like they realized we know each other through social media, and they told that person to tell me, your report is spot on, that's what we have. So that's a foreign government's intelligence service saying, good job, like bravo.
Who was it? Can you mention that?
It was a European one.
Okay.
So to say nobody has that, I think is untrue. I hope our government has it, right? But the dishonesty behind it would be a problem if they did. And they're not preparing America for this October 7th round of attacks that are coming here.
You're mentioning law enforcement being proactive, and I don't see that happening no matter what.
Right. But at least if so you know how budgets work and training works and everything else. At least if you say a threat's coming and the government puts out something, it gives you a catalyst or it gives you something to hold on to, right? And you can go and say, we need more training. We haven't even done this type of training in 6 years. Like, you can start having the discussions. But if nobody's sharing anything, and I don't know if you saw, but Scott Mann and I went and met with Governor DeSantis and briefed this to him, and he said, I've received no threat reporting at all on terrorism from the federal government. So they're not passing anything down to these levels. So anyone who's like, yeah, this is all happening behind the scenes, don't worry, everyone's prepared, our law enforcement knows. Most of the country have never heard Al-Qaeda's planning an attack here.
Well, actually, I'll redact what I just mentioned. It sounded like DeSantis actually took it very seriously.
He did.
And didn't he develop some sort of a task force?
So he did multiple things. He, the next day, briefed the sheriffs, every sheriff in the state of Florida, and told them there's a potential threat, which matters, right? And then, he created like basically a kind of an information sharing so we can get in touch with his people immediately if we found some threat info or just something useful that he could get the state involved in or to train behind. So he's been proactive of like, how can I get ahead of this?
Well,
or how can I use people like you, right? Like your community. Florida's full of retired special ops guys who fought these guys for 20 years overseas, right? And he understands that, and he's like, how do I harness that?
Well, that's what I was getting at. So he did stand up. Eddie Gallagher was telling me about it. I think Scott told me about it.
Well, there's a little bit. So that's slightly different, but he'll be able to utilize that. So he basically has this thing called the Florida National Guard. And the Florida National Guard is like, could have the capabilities of a counterterrorism force. It's being trained properly that way. It has different type of legal authorities. So he has positioned the state of Florida to basically have a force that is a force multiplier against counterterrorism, and this doesn't really exist in other states. So he, though, was on that train even before the Al-Qaeda threat. He just got ahead of it, right? So he was already preparing something like this, and he now has a force with the capabilities that at least can respond along with law enforcement, basically. So you'll have more trained bodies to deal with this faster in an emergency. So
I wonder if there's a way to get, I'm obviously very concerned about Tennessee. I wonder if there's a way to get DeSantis to have a chat with Bill Lee, the governor of Tennessee, to start standing something up like that, because I thought that was genius. In fact, I'm going to have my social media team cut a clip of that and try to target Bill Lee to get his attention about that, because there's also a ton of special operations guys, retired guys like me that are out now that live in Tennessee. And that would be, why would you not do that at this point?
Exactly.
Especially with the way the federal government is, the border wide open.
No one's coming to save you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's true.
Scott's book.
And you really should have someone come on, because my summary of the Florida National Guard was probably horrible, and they're probably going to sit and watch us and be like, she doesn't even know what we did, right? We do way more than that. So you should have someone come on and actually talk about it, because I think it would be interesting for people to see, hey, there are other models out there. People are being creative and innovative on this. States need to take a look at this.
Yeah, the federal government, hopefully that changes come January 20th, but right now it's not functioning. States better start getting involved. You mentioned something about the IRGC targeting. What is the IRGC to start with?
Basically, it's another branch of the Iranian military, but it would be more like JSOC than like the
Okay.
U.S. Army, if that makes sense.
So it's
they
their tier
have like
one
a
units.
U.S. Army.
Okay.
And then there's different pieces of it. So the most famous one is the Quds Force, and that was one run by Qasem Soleimani. And the Quds Force, it was almost like special ops, CIA, and lethal operations, like all in one.
Okay. And so are they targeting Trump?
So Trump is the one they blame for the death of Qasem Soleimani because he set up the team. He got the approvals. Because remember, Qasem Soleimani was potentially like he was a Iranian military general. So the U.S. government wouldn't put him on a hit list because they're like, that's an official in another government. It wasn't until Trump came in and put lethal authorities that the U.S. could go after him. Iran knows this, so they blame his death in Iraq on Trump almost solely. So they've been planning an operation. I call it the Soleimani plot, but the U.S. government probably calls it something different. And we came across the Soleimani plot while doing our October 7th investigation because the terrorist I told you about, Mohammad Kazemi, he's masterminding it. So it's so crazy. So he was one of the key plotters of October 7th. He's masterminding, basically assassinating President Trump. The U.S. government doesn't have him on the FBI most wanted list.
Probably because they want him dead.
But isn't that crazy? He's like the mastermind behind a plot. Even if Trump wasn't going to be the president again, he was the mastermind of a plot against a former U.S. president. He's not even on our wanted list. This is the problem with our counterterrorism has just gone off the rails, right?
Why? Why is it DEI? What is it? What's going on?
I pray they knew he was the mastermind, but there's a potential, like we were the only ones that found the suicide bomber's true name. There's a potential we got lucky and we found the mastermind before the U.S. government. But even once we put it out, nobody in the U.S. government has contacted us to even ask about it. And the crazy part is, we put this at the end of our report, the money going into the Soleimani plot is phenomenal. It's $145 million a month. So that doesn't just assassinate a president. So we don't know what the plot is. The U.S. government's the one that says it's a plot against Trump. There is a ton of money behind that plot. So I don't know if it's bigger than Trump. I don't know if it's Trump and some other symbols. Because remember, so what Iran usually does, and this is a correct assessment by the U.S. government, when they target someone or something, it's always equal. So like if you hit their embassy, they would hit back your embassy. If you killed a scientist, they would do an assassination, right? So the U.S. government is like, okay, we killed Qasem Soleimani. So Iran is going to counter by doing an assassination. But Qasem Soleimani isn't just a man in Iran. To Iran, he was the symbol of the Iranian revolution. Think about that. So he's like, I don't know, our capital or our Statue of Liberty. He's bigger than a man, right? So I do think U.S. might be underestimating how the Iranians view Qasem Soleimani. And I think that the response to him is going to be bigger than that they're assassinating. I don't think it's just going to be the assassination of one man.
Who do you think? Who else do you think might be on that list?
I mean, with that kind of money, like I wonder if it's the Capitol.
The entire Capitol. Holy shit.
Well, the building, you know.
Wow. Let's move into the homeland. Why? We'll move into the homeland, then I was going to save that to the end, but it's getting hard to concentrate because that's all I could think about. I think about this stuff all the time. What's coming? I mean, when I talk to Scott, and I can't remember, sometimes I get my conversations blurred because is it on camera or off camera? I can't fucking remember. But Scott, if I remember correctly, Scott told me that Al-Qaeda is basically predicting that the casualty count will be between 50 and 60,000 Americans dead. Am I wrong on that?
So I don't know the count that they're predicting. What I do know is Al-Qaeda trained and sent 1,000 attackers.
1,000 attackers. When did they come through?
So they finished training and they deployed them. Now, depending on how they come through, it could take different times, right? So the fastest I've seen an Afghan leave Afghanistan and get over the border illegally is about 3 weeks. Now, if you get a tourist visa and a Saudi's passport, he can fly the day after he gets his visa, right? So it depends, because they are fine getting people in however they can get them in, and they actually prefer legal immigration, as you can imagine, because they want basically the attackers to sit here and wait. If they're legal, they're not going to raise any alarm bells.
So wait a minute. I just want to clarify. You are 100% certain that there are 1,000 plus Al-Qaeda trained fighters within the United States borders?
Well, Al-Qaeda says they trained and deployed 1,000 for this attack. First off, I think there's more than 1,000 Al-Qaeda members in the United States. But for the Homeland attack, that number is based on what Al-Qaeda is saying, so they could exaggerate it. However, they did have about 1,400 in the Hamas attack, so the number is not off from what they did in the first round of attacks.
Is there any indication of what kind of attacks these are going to be? Actually, before we get into that, how old is this information?
I mean, it's ongoing. So the training's already done, right? So all the training info is now old because they trained all the Homeland attackers, if that makes sense. So like next week, you're not going to get info of a Homeland attacker probably at a terrorist camp because it's already done. So all this has been in the last year.
So it's been over a year. It's been a year. Because
this was a continuation, so they planned October 7th first, and then they rolled into planning this after.
Are we next, or is Europe next?
I think the embassy attacks are next, in my opinion.
What are they waiting for the embassies?
I don't think they're waiting. I think it took time to train them. They've now approved them, and they've now moved into the operational stage.
What about the U.S.?
So the U.S., from what we've seen, I told you about the camps, right? That there's the advanced urban warfare. So we think it's going to look like October 7th, but it's actually based on, and October 7th was probably also based on it. It's based on the Mumbai attacks that occurred 15 years ago in Delhi, India. And we believe this for multiple reasons.
What happened there? Before we dig into that.
Yeah, we talked about this, I think it was my first episode. It was basically a terrorist group, Lashkar-e-Taiba. They did a number, it's called swarming attacks. They did a number of attacks into Delhi, at a hotel, the Taj Mahal, I believe it was called, at like basically the train station, etc. The interesting thing about it, and this is why they're going to employ it now, is those terrorists were given kind of like latitude. One, they could change the location they were attacking, and they could change the modus operandi they were using. So for example, when they went into the train station, it was supposed to be a bombing. When they got in there, they said, wow, we can kill more people just shooting them than putting the bomb together, and they shot them. Another thing that they did is in real time, information was being passed to them. So when they were in the Taj Mahal, they were being told what was on the press and what the police were doing, and they changed basically some of their movements in the hotel to make the attack last longer, okay? So this is the part that's going to be different, right? So Al-Qaeda always wants to innovate when it does its next attack, right? So I've already told you about the innovation of the suicide vests. Well, do you know we really haven't had a suicide bombing in the United States ever? There's the Nashville guy who did the strange, blew himself up in the car early in the morning when no one was around. That's kind of it.
The AT&T building?
Yep. So we have not had a man walk up to a building with a suicide vest on in the United States. Americans don't understand this. Al-Qaeda knows this, right? So this is new and innovative, especially now. You don't have to walk upside of the building. You can walk in the building because of the advancement of the vest. The other thing is, in the United States, we haven't had Fidayeen attackers. Do you know what this is? I mean, you'll know when I explain it. If you fought in, like, I don't know, Ramadi, Fallujah, you've seen these. So the concept is the terrorist fights to the death. So he's not exactly a suicide bomber, but he will fight till either all of us are dead or all of his people are dead, right? So this can go on for multiple days, like the plan was for Mumbai, for example. So we think it's going to be a swarming attack, right? Multiple different attacks at one time across multiple cities. We think there will be suicide bombings just because some of the attackers went through suicide suicide bomber training, and they have these vests, right? And then we think there's these Fideian attackers who will carry on until they're killed. The Fideian matters, right? I was watching, I want to say it was like 8 months ago.
Let me just rephrase that. So these guys are trained, and we already overlaid the video of their training, and they are going to fight until they're killed.
Yes.
There's no stopping them.
Exactly. And that matters, right? So I was watching this video, and it was a suicide bombing in Kabul years ago. And it was the bomber blew up, okay? And then everyone starts moving in. The first responders move in, right? And then another guy walks in and blows up. We know this is a tactic, right? But if Americans don't understand this as a tactic and don't understand these attackers are going to fight to the death, think about that. So battle's going on. The attacker surrenders, right? He might have the suicide vest. You know, we let our guard down. That man came to die, right? He's going to fight till he dies or you dies. So we can't let our guards down. And they know our weakness, right? So we have to be very careful that we don't have more people die in these second and third order effects of not knowing their intent.
What kind of places do you think they're going to target?
So this is what's complicated. So Al-Qaeda's preference, as you can imagine, is symbols of the U.S. or anything that causes economic damage, right? So Capitol is a great symbol. Capitol was actually I think the Capitol is, a lot of people are targeting it, but the Capitol was in their propaganda just as 9/11 when they were memorializing 9/11, right? So the Capitol matters. I feel like bridges or any kind of public transportation always matters because it puts costs against us and it causes fear. But here's where it gets complicated. So remember, the terrorists might have their goal is they're going to attack the metro in DC, right? But remember, some of these terrorists are going to be ISIS. And remember, they can change location. So the ISIS guy might go down the metro and say, there's not many people down here. I'll kill 20, but there's a event going on. I'm going to go up there, right? And because ISIS is a little different. ISIS just wants mass casualty. So it's going to be interesting how it works with terrorists that came from different backgrounds and when they get choice.
So some of these terrorist organizations are looking for very strategic stuff like U.S. Capitol, you know, basically U.S. governmental infrastructure and elites. And then on the other hand, you have what I'm used to seeing when we were over there. They just look for the easiest, biggest target because they want to kill the most amount of people in the quickest amount of time and get the most press out of it.
Yep.
And so that would lead me to believe universities, churches, stadiums,
farmers markets, those type of things.
How many people, how many fighters do you think we can expect in each attack?
Well, the 1,000 is all of them. So we're calling it's an Al-Qaeda planned attack, but within those 1,000 terrorists, some of them are ISIS because they want ISIS to be blamed. We have a theory on it. I hate to throw out theories. We think the actual like.
It's the first time I think you've ever thrown out a theory.
I know. I just then people are like, she's crazy. I think the more of the fighter types are going to be ISIS because then if they're caught, then they talk. I'm ISIS. I think more of the suicide bombers are going to be Al-Qaeda.
Will these attacks do you think these attacks will happen simultaneously throughout the United States? Or will they be one day here, next day here, another one over here next week?
So they want them coordinated. I don't know if coordinated means all at the same time or if coordinated means we do it Monday, we do it Tuesday, we do it Wednesday, we do it Thursday, we do it Friday, just do 5 straight days. So, but they want it coordinated. What's coordinated mean? And the other argument we have, does coordinated also mean U.S. and Europe at the same time? And is Europe all coordinated at the same time? So when they say coordinated, we don't know exactly what that means. So they could also be U.S. and Europe at the same time, which is complicated.
Do you think Europe will see mass casualties, or earlier you kind of mentioned that you think that the primary target in Europe is still U.S. embassies?
No, that's for the wave. So remember, there's a wave of embassy attacks, but then there's this multi-coordinated attack. It's a completely separate wave of attacks. So they're going to get the same October 7th attack in Europe as we're getting in the US, as planned right now anyway. And they also, so 1,000 terrorists were supposedly trained for the US and deployed, and 1,000 were supposedly trained for the Europe attack and deployed. The embassy plots are completely different with completely different trained terrorists.
Man, why haven't they hit yet?
Because the training takes the time. So for
they're
Israel,
here. They're here though.
Supposedly, yeah.
Okay,
they got here.
Let me ask, how long have they been here?
I'm not sure, but if we just do math quick, okay? Israel, they trained 500 terrorists, right? They got a longer timeline, but they were planning to train 500 in 3 months, right? 2 months. So they were going to train 500 in 2 months for Israel. So for Israel, they did it really quick, but it would have been half-assed. They luckily ended up with 1.5 years. But then remember, I told you they had to train 10,000 for Syria. And I think that gets completely ignored, okay? So they have this huge number, and we just saw what the effect of it, right? So the 10,000 for Syria, and some went to Iraq, became the priority. And then we think the homeland attackers were in there. And then that's training's done too, if that makes sense. So they are training for multiple phases at the same time. So it takes time to get through all the training.
Man, this stuff scares the shit out of me. What do you think? Okay, you had mentioned earlier, we just got done talking about the significance of October 7th. How many other dates are there that it could potentially, if they're looking for that kind of, symbology or whatever you want to call it, how many dates are we looking at? Is it too many are there too many significant dates throughout the 20 years that we were over there that we can't, we can't, do you know what I'm trying to say?
I know what you're
saying. How many dates are we looking at here?
Yeah.
Is it impossible? Is it 365? Is every day of the year after 20 years a potential date? Or are there some specific hard dates that you think that federal, state, local governments should be looking at?
Sure. Well, I think if we just talk about the October 7th investigation we did, we actually discussed 3 dates. We discussed the significance of October 7th being the day we started Operation Enduring Freedom. Remember when I said they started training in August? They actually started training on August 7th. They chose August 7th because that was the anniversary of the Tanzania and Kenya embassy bombings, okay? So they did choose even a historic date to start training, okay? And then when you go to 9/11, the majority of Americans, I don't even think the majority of the U.S. government knows why 9/11 was chosen. You'll get these stupid theories. It was start of the school year, or 11 means Allah, or something like that. It comes from 9/11, 1922, and it was basically kind of, after the time of the British Mandate, and that was the first day they basically took a Westerner and said, this Westerner, and he ended up being a British and Jewish, you are in charge of kind of like this Palestinian type of mandate. And Al-Qaeda had cared about a date from 1922, and that's why they chose 9/11 to attack us. So there are dates that matter, right? But we focus on the dates that matter to us, and we forget to look at the dates that matter to them, right? So a lot of people say, well, it's likely then going to happen on the day bin Laden was killed. Is it? When they're choosing a date from 1922. So I think there's dates that matter. And I did some work, and I forget one I picked. I think it was like June 5th or something, and it was some historic thing, right? But there, like you said, there's a lot to choose from. And the other thing you need to keep in mind is there's been this war going on in Syria, for a very long time. And a lot of things happen in Syria that have open wounds for these terrorists, right? And it's why a lot of these terrorists have come together is from the war in Syria. So they could just pick a date. A terrorist was murdered in Syria, for example, right? Or even Hamza bin Laden's wife was killed in the operation to kill her father. They could choose the date she was killed. So there's also just so many terrorist martyrs that they could choose dates from, within the last 20 years of war. So it's really hard to pick a date because then you're also anticipating something that doesn't happen. Even how 2025 is, right? So Al-Qaeda's planning the attack for 2025. But remember, I told you, Israel was planned for 2022. It got shifted a year. Now, if you are following that and it didn't happen, you're like, okay, the attack didn't happen. The information was bullshit, right? So if attack doesn't happen in 2025 and they push it a few months, then people put their guard down again. And we need to be careful about stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I don't even know where to go from here. I mean, it just sounds, it sounds inevitable that it's going to happen.
I know. And that's the thing, it just dawned on me too. When we did October 7th, this is really interesting because this goes back to, what you talked about earlier, passing threats and leads to the government, which is almost impossible. People saw these Hamas terrorists planning and training in Afghanistan, and it got provided to Israel. When we did our investigation, some people gave us the reports they gave to the Israeli government, and we used them in our October 7th investigation. So we saw some of the stuff passed to the Israelis, so they knew at least Hamas was training for some big plot in Afghanistan. And I worry because same things are being passed to our government, and they're not taking it serious, right? And I don't know how what happened in Israel doesn't make you think twice, right? About, hey, we're making the same mistake.
What are we talked a lot about, passports too in your previous episode. Are they coming in straight to the U.S., with U.S. passports or passports with visas to the U.S., or is the majority of it going to South America and then funneling up through the Darien Gap into the southern border?
So in my opinion, terrorists in general just leaving Afghanistan, a lot of them are coming up through the Darien Gap to the border. And there was a big push, right? Get in the U.S. while you can. Now, not all those Al-Qaeda's attackers, right? But they came in with fake Afghan passports. They came in with fake Syrian passports, fake Turkish passports. Those are the kind of the three preferences because they're easiest to get. And then, if our Border Patrol agents, a lot of them haven't been overseas, right? If an Egyptian shows up at the border with a Syrian passport, is he going to know that person was Egyptian? I mean, his passport says Syrian, right? Yeah. So we have that problem. But then Al-Qaeda wants to embarrass us again, like they did with the 9/11 attackers, and they've trained clean terrorists, right, from like Saudi, Kuwait, Jordan, etc. And they want them to get legitimate visas, so we can't trust our system again. So we have both issues going on. The other issue too is a lot of these terrorists are coming up, right? And there still is the problem of lone wolves. There is the problem of we have terrorists in this country now where those members have never been in this country, right? We don't have any idea what their intent is. Islamic movement of Uzbekistan is a great example, right? They've sent terrorists from Afghanistan region here. Why, right? We have terrorists in this country that we don't even know their long-term plans against us because they're never really been a focus of ours, or we focused on them with this little piece where they did a few operations or training with Al-Qaeda, right? But we don't know the intent, and maybe they just are force multipliers for Al-Qaeda or the Islamic Army, but we lack the understanding.
Do you think these numbers are going to grow? I mean, we just saw I'm not spun up on the Syria thing, but it looked like we're done. Trump said we shouldn't even be there. Does that free up? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? But what I'm asking is, does that free up? You said they sent 10,000 new trained terrorists to Syria. So now that that's kind of done, are they coming here?
Well, the bad part with those 10,000, right, is there's battles going to continue. The Kurds, right? There's definitely going to be a war with the Kurds. So there's still going to be battles going on in Syria. But remember, Al-Qaeda has all these waves. So they have the Caliphate wave. The Caliphate wave includes Syria, Iraq, Mali, Somalia, Burkina Faso. So those 10,000 will likely roll into either Iraq or they'll deploy to Africa. Okay. So they're likely not coming here just because they're in like the Caliphate wave and they've been trained in that wave, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense to put them with the people you've trained to do the homeland attack or the embassy attacks, et cetera, just because you have enough bodies. And that's the thing. The number of recruits they can bring into Afghanistan, we've never seen anything like it. So there is no lack of bodies. There's no lack of terrorist volunteering. there's this really amazing documentary. Boone and I went and saw it, 6 or 7 months ago. It was called Jihad Rehab. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Sadly, when it got put out, I want to say it was originally at Sundance, and then there was a lot of news that people were exploiting the terrorists, like the director was exploiting the terrorists, I kid you not. And then it got a bunch of hate, and it was almost like taken off of everything, and theaters like, we're not playing it. And so the director, she's kind of gone city to city and finances it herself and puts it out. So she was putting it, some people paid for her to come to the villages in Florida, and I was like, I want to see this, let's drive up. So we went up to the villages, which is super happening, by the way.
I've heard all about the villages.
I've never been there. And one night there, I was like, I get it. 5-10 years, I might be buying a house here.
God,
it was a cool place. There was tons of people our age. So the fact that everyone's super old is also a lie. But of course, we're like older now. So anyway, it's a really interesting documentary. But what she does is she walks through basically 4 Al-Qaeda terrorists and their path, and they're now in the Saudi government's rehabilitation program. And then you walk through as they're going through that program and then how it ends, okay? Well, in it, they all talk about why they joined Al-Qaeda and why they deployed to Afghanistan, etc. And they all have a different reason. The interesting part is Al-Qaeda focuses on those reasons, and one of them, basically, she asked him, was life easier for you in Afghanistan? And he said yes. Because the terrorists make a whole social security net, okay? So Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are so amazing at this. So if you go there as a foreign fighter, right, you obviously have a home. You have all the weapons you want. You get all the training you want, right? You get a financial stipend. And then if you're young, you can get married. And the crazy part is you don't have to marry an Afghan woman. If you came from Syria and you want to marry a Syrian woman, Al-Qaeda will bring in Syrian women. So they want you to, and the crazy part is, and people don't understand this, so Al-Qaeda realized something they did wrong, okay? We didn't focus enough on second and third generation, and we definitely didn't train second and third generation. So when the U.S. came at us and started especially drone striking us, we couldn't keep up and keep putting good talent in, right? The third and fourth string of external operations sucked. I met one of them, right? So Al-Qaeda's like, we're not going to let this happen again. We want you to come here. We want you to have families. We're going to train your sons. We're going to train the next generation. Shit. We're going to be a whole jihadi family, and we're never going to have that failure again where the second generation can't step up.
Wow. Another thing I want to ask you about is China. You know, China was in negotiations with Taliban before we ever even left. Huge lithium deposits in Afghanistan. I've got reports from my local law enforcement talking about Chinese state coming through the border, setting up all these camps all over the place. They've traced them all the way from Tennessee to Nevada. They've seen training camps where Chinese state are actually training. Do you think there's going to be any coordination between the terrorist homeland attacks and will Chinese state be involved in that?
So, from what I know, so there's 2 pieces to this. Can we do China and Russia? Because Russia's a big problem. They're trying to counter us as we're trying to counter them. So China's a little more of a longer game. Now, China is meeting with the terrorists. The place I have an issue with China is I do think China is going to find a way to use the terrorists as proxies. But the place I'm most concerned about is, you talked about the lithium, but there's uranium mines too. So at least the uranium mines in like 2 of the provinces in the south are essentially owned and run by China. So China's in them. Al-Qaeda is in them. And IRGC is there trying to help Al-Qaeda basically use uranium, not exactly like you would use it for a nuclear program, maybe like a dirty bomb or something. So China, Iran, and Al-Qaeda are basically in the same building, right? So think of that as they innovate on that and grow. If we go to war with China, I do think China will likely wait and use the terrorists as a proxy against us. Now that brings us to Russia, right? So we talked about this in our October 7th report. So the terrorists actually decided to do the Israel attacks after Russia invaded Ukraine. They're like, it's a really good time. Everybody's focused on Ukraine. So they started the plotting in March of 2022. When they started the plotting, the terrorists reached out to Russia and said, is this going to be okay? And Russia's like, go for it, go for it, go for it. So when Zawahiri was killed and Al-Qaeda's like, we're not doing this attack October 7th because the U.S. will come and bomb all of our locations in Afghanistan. We'll lose our base. They reached back out to Russia, and Russia's like, no, do it in 2022. Don't wait. I need to get this pressure off me from my war in Ukraine. Well, fast forward to these, there is information that Russia is helping bring in some of the tools necessary for Al-Qaeda's homeland attack.
Say that again.
There's information that Russia and Russian pipelines are helping bring in some of the resources that are going to support Al-Qaeda's homeland attack. And it's to
into this country?
Yep, to push at us for Ukraine. Just like we're doing stuff against Russia.
So hold on.
Push
so
at
let me
them
get this
against
straight.
Ukraine.
So Russia's sending supplies into the United States to help with the terrorist homeland.
Their pipeline is helping move some of Al-Qaeda's supplies in the United States for their homeland attack.
Which is probably our own fucking supplies because we left everything there.
So,
am I right?
I mean, it's a different kind of supply. I'll tell you what the supply is. But it is a Russian channel, reportedly, that the supply has moved through. So we have to remember there's a lot of dirty games going on around the Russian-Ukraine war. We're doing things to counter Russia and likely funding terrorists. Russia's doing the same thing, to not think they're trying to also undercut us and also get on the side of our enemy and hit us with our enemy. Because think about it. Al-Qaeda's going to pull off an attack. It's going to be blamed on ISIS. No one's going to call it Al-Qaeda. No one's definitely going to say Russia played a piece in it, right? So it's very smart of them, too. And so there's all this kind of like, we say we're near peer, and near peer has gotten smart about using terrorists. We might be thinking Sirajudeen Haqqani can be used against them. And so everybody's playing this game of the terrorists now.
So we have two of the world's largest superpowers convoluting with Al-Qaeda and terrorist organizations.
And Taliban. And remember, to them, they beat us, right? Like right now, like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are power players. I mean, people think, oh, Afghanistan's a third world country. They're not being treated a third world country, right? Our enemies are not treating them that way. They're treating them with respect, right? They're saying, what can you do for me? What can I do for you?
And Iran. I forgot Iran.
And Iran. And there's North Koreans in Afghanistan too.
You know, also, you know, that makes a lot of sense with the Israel stuff. I know there's a lot of controversy about that. I didn't really understand why we're so heavily involved with that. But now...
It's the same guys who are going to attack us. So let Israel take them out.
That makes... So do you
Worth
think...
every penny.
Yeah. So do you think that's why we're doing it?
Well, I think we're doing it because they are an ally, right? I don't think people understand that is just the dress rehearsal, the first step to our attack. I don't think they understand it that way. But I do think people understand, I mean, Israel's taking out these guys who did the Beirut Marine bombings. So there is still a level of respect that they really are taking out some of our enemies and terrorists who did kill a lot of Americans who were never brought to justice.
I mean, they've been pretty damn effective from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm, they have been.
It's very...
We've never seen anything like this at this level, to be honest.
Yeah, it's...
at the speed.
Super impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if we're capable of that kind of shit anymore.
We're not legally capable.
I feel like we're just a fucking joke.
Yeah, I'd rather have another country do it for me. I mean, even our Benghazi attackers, half of them are killed. Nothing to do with the United States. It's General Haftar in Libya did it. U.S. won't even back him. And he basically like, fine, I'll pay Wagner Group to do it. I mean, it's bad, right? If U.S. would have backed him, we could have had all the successes. We don't have the spine.
Man. What else do you want to talk about?
It's up to you. I'm your guest.
I don't know if I can take any more bad news today, Sarah. What do you think about Cash Patel taking the FBI?
I mean, I'm looking forward to, I mean, you know, FBI to us is a huge failure. The Benghazi investigation's a nightmare. We passed them the mortar team last November, as I told you. We still don't have a response. You know, I talk about how we passed tips and threats to multiple government organizations. We passed them something I felt interesting, actionable, that they could get ahead of on ISIS. No response. So no matter what, like his first day on the job, I want to bug him. And so, we still haven't got our Benghazi attackers watch listed, right? Big problem. We're completely upset about it. We've written, as I told you, like over a dozen Congress people. But there's one Benghazi plotter, and I've talked about him on the last episode, and we did a whole report on him. We call it Al-Qaeda's Lord of War, and I'll say the long name again. So the terrorists call him Musa bin Ali, but his name is Abdul Azim Ali Musa bin Ali, and he's from the Al-Darsi clan in Libya. But he was a 2012 Benghazi plotter, I've told you this before, and he is also involved in the U.S. Homeland plot. He helped on the Hamas attacks, and he's helping in some of the U.S. embassy attacks. And we want him put on the FBI most wanted list. Like, they can put one Benghazi attacker on the wanted list already. This is ridiculous. He's continuing attacks against us, and it's just he's completely ignored, right? Because he was involved in Benghazi attacks. Nobody cares. And look at all these other things he's doing. He was one of the big logistics guy for all these fighters in Syria. And then we act like we didn't even know all those guys got there. Guess what? If you were following him and targeting him, you would have seen all these fighters move there. Numerous people have been passing stuff to the U.S. government about all these guys training in Afghanistan for Syria. They didn't want to hear it. They said, those numbers are exaggerated. We don't believe it. If this was happening, we'd see it. It's like, no, you're not going to see it. You lost 99% of intelligence collection. You rely on the Taliban now. You are not going to see it. And it's like getting over their arrogance. When we were in Benghazi, we knew we had no counterterrorism collection, right? Like we hadn't really had it under Gaddafi. We relied on him. And then we had no terrorist sources and terrorist groups in Benghazi at the time. We knew we were sitting ducks, right? I don't know how we can't get smart people to be honest and say, yeah, we don't have this collection. I don't have an asset, the U.S. government, not I don't have an asset on Hamza bin Laden. I need to go make an asset on Hamza bin Laden, right? Like I'm behind the curve. Why can't they do that? Why aren't they doing their jobs?
Well, I mean, the only thing that comes to my mind is we fucking pulled everybody out, so there's literally no intelligence collection happening over there right now.
The other problem is, and Scott said this to you, and Scott's 100% right, the allies we abandoned, hate the CIA. They hate huge parts of the military, except maybe their one friend. They are collecting info and won't even give it to us. I talked to some Afghans and they said, we actually passed some stuff to Israel. We'll never pass it to the United States. Think about that. They'll pass it to Israel.
Wow.
So the other part is we abandoned some quality people and they hate us now. So we're not going to get the information even if we try, because they'll be like, screw you. What we did, this is crazy. So, I was talking to a CIA asset that got abandoned, okay? And so I was like, well, what happened? Like, what did they do? And he said, they gave me a phone number, and they said, when you get to the Kabul airport, call this number and we'll get you evacuated, okay? It's a one-way number. It basically goes to a voice answering service, right? So he's like, I called it. No one ever called me back. And he said, and then one day they turned it off. He had no way to ever recontact them again. They shut off the damn phone number.
Holy shit. So they would have to build completely new relationships.
And how do you at that point?
With nobody.
You didn't even give me the respect to give me a number to call in a threat once or twice a year?
With zero footprint. Well, I don't even know where to go from here.
Me neither. You're the expert.
I'm the expert?
Yeah, you do this multiple times a week.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just talking as a country.
I know. It's frustrating.
It makes me worried from my kids. Like, it's what I really worry about.
Right? Because it's amazing. We only empowered these terrorists for a few years, but look at what they've done with it. And I think there's a real disconnect in the U.S. Like, the U.S. is like, yeah, well, we haven't had terrorist attacks here. Yeah, because we were over there killing them. And now they plot, they train. We don't hit the camps. We used to bomb the camps. So Americans don't understand that those attacks didn't happen here because you and I were overseas stopping them.
Yeah.
Right? And so they're like, yeah, it's fine. And they downplay it. It's like, we've been saving you for 20 years. Nobody's doing it anymore. So you better learn to save yourself, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very frustrating thing, too, because you can't get any support for this. They're like, oh, terrorism is just a political thing, and they just try to bring fear in you. And it's like, what are you talking about? So it's very frustrating.
Well, that's Americans. That's how they are, man. Disconnected. But when do you think, this would be I want to wrap the interview up, but
Sure.
how certain are you think we'll see something in 2025?
I'm certain we'll either have embassy attacks in 2025 or the homeland attack or both.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. So, Sarah Adams, former CIA targeter, and like I said, we got a love-hate relationship. I love having you on. I hate the information that you bring us because it's just, but, we need to know it because while the government doesn't want to take this shit seriously, a lot of citizens do, and, they're getting ready. A lot of people are getting ready. A lot of people are yanking their kids out of school because of safety. A lot of people are at least yanking them out of schools that have no safety precautions or any plan at all. and it's important that regular everyday Americans hear this stuff because, like you said, like Scott Mann says, nobody's coming to save you. This machine is no longer working, and so you better take matters into your own hands. And once again, Sarah, you write our intelligence newsletter every week, comes out every Monday. Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy. We'll link it in the description below, and let's go get some lunch, and I'll see you in a couple months.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.